Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever your time zone, welcome. This is AI Talk, and I'm your host, Kevin Crane. Welcome to the show. Today, we'll be discussing ways to master your generative AI destiny. Now, look, everybody's talking about generative AI, but how do you really use it in ways that matter? Well, we'll be exploring today the transformative world of generative AI and ways to harness its potential. The first point we'll cover is the need to experiment with Gen AI. In today's tech environment, the willingness to experiment is crucial. Embracing a culture of experimentation allows organizations to innovate and discover unique applications for generative AI tailored to your specific needs. So I'll ask our guest today to explore some practical tips and some case studies on how to foster that experimentation. We'll also delve into how to scale Gen AI. While initial experiments can be exciting, scaling Gen AI solutions is where the real impact happens. So, what are some strategies for integrating Gen AI into our existing workflows and scaling it across departments and functions? And what are some best practices for creating a robust Gen AI approach and infrastructure that supports scalability and innovation? And finally, we can't overlook the importance of employee training and upskilling. As Gen AI technologies evolve, so must our workforce. It's not merely enough to adopt new tools, it's about fostering a culture of improvement and learning and development and innovation. So how do we create training programs that empower employees to embrace Gen AI and ensure they have the skills and knowledge necessary to leverage those technologies effectively? Look, by the end of the session, I hope that you'll be equipped with some actionable strategies to master your Gen AI destiny. So stay tuned for a great panel of guests here in just a moment. But before I introduce our guests, I do want to say thank you to everyone attending today, and that includes the folks that are joining us live on LinkedIn. Hello there. And hello to everyone joining us today on Zoom. Thank you for being with us. Join us on Zoom for the full experience. It should be a great discussion today. I want to say that we want to hear from you too. We'd like to encourage everyone attending today to participate. So please join in with your comments in the chat feature. If you have a question along the way, please jump on in. That's where I'll be looking, and I will attempt to get some of your questions into the flow of the show today. And we'll also have a few minutes also at the end for your questions. All right, well, let's jump into it today and introduce our great panel of guests, starting with David Perea, Chief Gen AI Officer at NTT Data. David, welcome aboard. Where are you calling in from?
Coming from Barcelona, Spain. Happy to be here
Barcelona.
with all of you.
Very nice. Thank you, David, for being with us. Looking forward to getting your comments today. Also with us today is Eve Salty, Senior Director of Artificial Intelligence at Microsoft. Eve, welcome aboard. Where are you calling in from today?
Hi, Kevin. Here in Seattle, Washington.
Wonderful, beautiful Seattle, Washington. Perhaps rainy today. So welcome aboard, Eve. Thank you so much for being with us. Also today with us is Andrew Wells, Chief Data and AI Officer at NTT Data. Welcome aboard, Andrew. Where are you calling in from?
Hey, Kevin. I'm calling in from Atlanta, Georgia.
Atlanta. All right. Very good. Well, folks, welcome aboard. Thank you so much. We have a lot to cover today, so I want to move us along quickly to draw our attention to an article published recently by the Wall Street Journal titled "Companies Had Fun Experimenting with AI. Now They Have to Show the Returns." And the article talks about how companies are moving beyond experimenting with Gen AI and are now focusing on projects that demonstrate a clear business value and return on investment. The phase of unrestricted AI experimentation is winding down as business leaders expect to deliver tangible results. But there can be some challenges along the way, certainly with scaling AI. Many AI projects, especially generative AI, are stuck in the testing or pilot phase. The article talks about how as much as 70 to 90% of these AI experiments are not successfully deployed. We'll be talking more about techniques for scaling today. Look, the upshot of the article is that business leaders are under increasing pressure to demonstrate the impact of generative AI in the next 12 months, either through increased productivity or through revenue generation. Folks, what are your thoughts on the article? I'd like to start with you, David. What are your thoughts on the article? Did the article miss anything important that we should consider?
Well, I think the article is spot on, Kevin. I think leaders are under a very big pressure to demonstrate how they can provide results of the investment that has been done on generative AI. And what we are seeing at Entity Data is that it's very difficult to provide return of investment only with POCs, only with the first experimentation of generative AI. Actually, what we are seeing is that you need around 12 months to 14 months to provide that return of investment. But given you provide that return of investment is from $1 that you invest, you will get $3.50 for the investment. So that's a very good ratio, but you need to be patient and you need to be ready to scale what you're doing on the first experimentations. So I think that's very spot on. The article, I think, focuses on one of the big challenges that we are trying to help our customers with right now.
Now, Eve, David mentioned that there is some ROI there, but the need for patience. And indeed, the article talks about how many AI initiatives are not successful. From your perspective, working with clients and through Microsoft, is this your experience as well? And if so, what do you recommend that we do to raise our rate of success?
Yeah, that's a great question, and actually something that we see customers struggling a lot. I would say, I know there is pressure from the board, from the CEO, from the leadership team to integrate AI into all operations or to have an AI plan for the company. At a very practical level, though, I would recommend starting with small, simple use cases that are grounded in a very kind of like fundamental business need. Like, is this something around improving the customer experience through modernizing the contact center or automating some processes there? Are you trying to increase productivity while kind of like, maybe driving developer efficiency or automating some business analytics? Or are you trying to automate a process through document processing? So I would say start with a business need first, then identify a use case that is small enough and is defined in a particular scope so that you can drive early results and showcase the ROI in kind of like, 8 to 12 months, and then go from there.
Oh, that's great advice. And Andrew, when I hear about the need to demonstrate ROI, I'm reminded of an old adage that my executives used to tell me, look, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And business leaders are under pressure to demonstrate ROI either through increased productivity or revenue generation. Help me out. How are some ways that I can measure and demonstrate that ROI?
Good question, Kevin. And one of the things I think is often missing from the conversation is the use of Gen AI to drive competitive differentiation. How are you creating a moat around your business by using these tools to create a new service offering or differentiate your service offering or embed it in your products? Almost, so many product companies have come out and said, yes, we're AI powered, but how are you using Gen AI to make your product different than your competitors? And I think that's where the conversation should go, is how are you leveraging this technology to differentiate yourself and win at a faster pace than your competitors?
And where are the areas that I should look for to build that differentiation?
It depends on the type of company that you are and your industry, but I can give you a few examples. If you're a product company, how are you using Gen AI inside of a car experience, for example? If you're a car manufacturer, are you using Gen AI to help curate the music or help them curate the experience? If you're a fridge manufacturer, are you using Gen AI to understand the labels of yogurt, and you can understand more labels than anyone else with your LLM that makes your product different? And by understanding the labels and what's inside the fridge, you can reorder for someone. If you're a services company, how are you using Gen AI to build out AI agents that are different than your competitors and give your sales force a competitive edge in market because they're able to have faster proposal times or come up with unique solutions for their clients. I mean, Gen AI is a hammer with 1,000 nails. It is very early days, and people are still solving for how do I generate, returns with this technology? How do I drive productivity, and what's the efficacy of the solutions that I'm putting to bear? But this is the time to experiment, because if you're not experimenting and trying to drive change in your organization or with your business model, you will be left behind because your competitors are.
Well, that's a perfect segue to our next discussion point, Andrew. Thank you for that. But before we move on, the article is from the Wall Street Journal. Companies had fun experimenting with AI. Now they have to show returns. There is a link to that article over here in the chat feature. Everyone, take a look for yourselves and let us know what you think about this article. Did we miss anything? Did the article miss anything important that we should be considering? What are your thoughts on the article? We'd like to know. So pop your comments and questions into the chat feature and let us know. All right. Moving on then, let's get into our main discussion points today, folks. And that is indeed, as Andrew mentioned, the need to experiment with Gen AI. As I mentioned in the opener, the days of simply experimenting with AI may be coming to a close, but it doesn't stop us from having a need to be experimental and innovative with Gen AI to find the benefits for our organizations. So, Andrew, I'd like to start with you about this need for generative AI experimentation. Why is experimentation, in your view, so important?
Well, it's the dawn of a new technology, and like I mentioned, this is the technology is a hammer with 1,000 nails, and it's still very early days. We're just getting out of the era of LLMs and moving into the agentic era. And with that, the waves of technology change and how that impacts roles within your organization, business processes, as well as your business model is still a question mark. And how it applies to your particular business could manifest itself in a lot of different ways. Some of it's going to be based off of how ready you are for the change, whether it's impact to an individual role or how well is your data curated to be able to respond to these models to drive decisions that create actions for you, either to help with your customer service or in market. So, when you think about experimentation, we're still very early on, and you need to test different parts of this technology and the fit in your organization as the technology continues to mature. So, what we're recommending with a lot of our clients is generate a very strong backlog of use cases, prioritize them against ROI and the ability to execute, and then select the top, 20 and start the experimentation process. You're going to get a high failure rate, but fail fast and fail early. If you can get these down to 2 to 4 weeks in terms of time for experimenting on the initial POC to get the litmus test of whether or not this moves forward and it does provide value, you can then move on to the next stage of, well, how do we continue to mature the use case and eventually put it in production?
So don't be afraid, is what you're saying.
Yes, don't be afraid. Run towards the change, because if you don't, I promise you, your competition is.
And I was interviewing someone just yesterday about this subject, about this idea of experimenting and not being afraid. And indeed, many users now are starting to realize that, hey, I was initially resistant to this whole idea of generative AI. It's going to take my job away or whatever. But then they found that once they started using it in the real world, they loved it. Do you find that to be also the case?
Yes. It's like any change, whether it was putting your credit card online for the first time during the 90s. I'm dating myself a little bit here, but that was a big shift for people. I'll never buy anything online. Right. And then eventually said, okay, all right, I trust it enough. I'll give it my credit card so I can purchase things online. I think this is just the same thing. We're all going through a change curve, and we all need to start experimenting with the technology. the Microsoft tools make it very easy to experiment. I often will talk to my favorite LLM and I'll record the conversation and then I'll load that into PowerPoint and say, PowerPoint, create me a presentation based off of this, my conversation I had with the LLM. And it saves me tons of time and research to have that starting point that I could then use to build something better. So, use the tools. You got to get out there and start experimenting.
Now, Eve, Andrew mentioned Microsoft tools. You are, of course, the Senior Director of Artificial Intelligence for Microsoft. Can you tell us a little bit more? Give us a little bit of an idea what some of those tools are, and why do you feel that what makes you excited about those tools?
Yeah, I do agree that you need to have you need to be brave, and you need to start kind of like prototyping and learning, creating these iterative feedback loops, and also do it in an environment where you introduce responsibility. So the tools that we have, I mean, first of all, I think the whole concept of a co-pilot is an interesting one, because you don't have to be a developer or a data scientist to actually experiment and work with artificial intelligence and Gen AI. So as Andrew was saying, half of our team is basically working to integrate AI capabilities into the products that we have, whether it's the productivity tools or CRM or Bing, Xbox. So I think there are a lot of AI capabilities that people can start playing with, but also for more the developers or the data scientists, we also have some tools specifically around responsible AI. And I think that's an interesting kind of like checkpoint in the process to make sure that you are not introducing any bias, or you're kind of like at least diagnosing or mitigate any model error. So we have a responsible AI dashboard, and I recommend this because it's a great way to compare and contrast different AI models that you're using, help you to debug them, so that you can, safeguard the experience for your users and your customers. And again, having a feedback loop and making sure that you have an iterative process so that you can learn as you expand the number of use cases across teams, across departments, and also have a centralized center of excellence. I think this can be kind of like the gravitating point where you can have a lot of the best practices, a lot of the insights, the learnings that you can disseminate across departments and across the organization.
Now, David, Eve mentioned responsible AI, and that brings me to a question coming in from our audience I'd like to bring in now. This one coming from Chris Potter. Thank you, Chris, for your question and contribution today. Chris asks, how do the panelists recommend building trust around the use of Gen AI in the enterprise? Ethical AI frameworks are a lot less reassuring than you might think. David, what are your thoughts for Chris on this?
Well, I think this cannot be reduced to an ethical AI framework. So when it comes to this kind of trust generation, I think we need to think about how we can create what I call the employee value proposition of a technology. So that means that we're able to connect everyone in the organization, as Andrew was mentioning, to make sure that we can clearly explain how this technology will provide value. Value in the sense of return of investment, but also value in the terms of the company values that we want the AI to provide. So that's the relevant thing that we should be pushing, right? So not only understanding what the technology can do, but also what the technology should do. And I think there's a good edge in asking young people in the organization how they would use this technology for changing how we do things in our organization, because you would be surprised at the level of concerns that younger generations have on how to use and how to deploy AI in an ethical way. So they are the first ones that really understand the different impacts that this technology can have on things such as sustainability, and as Eve was mentioning, also on bias. So On a summary, I think that is very relevant that we create this kind of employee value proposition so we can create the trust in that we are using this technology for good. So this technology will provide value for the company, value for all of the employees, and also value for society.
All right, I want to move on to talking about how to scale generative AI, but before I do, there's another question here coming from Emma Roger. I'd just like to put it out to all of you in the group. Emma's asking, hi everyone, how can organizations effectively assess the suitability of different Gen AI models for their specific needs and goals? Any suggestions for Emma, folks?
I can
Well,
start.
I think,
Yeah.
please, Andrew, go ahead.
You know, we're going to be living in a world that's multimodal, and you're not going to have one LLM that does everything for you, at least not yet. I mean, there's different theories about whether or not the LLMs will get big enough and have enough data in them that you'll only need one. But the world we live in now and the world I think is coming to us is we're going to have LLMs and SLMs. And the small language models will be finer tuned, have less parameters, but the efficacy of it's going to be much higher. Its accuracy will be much higher, and it will be trained for very specific processes. So, you know, as you think about, is there one model that fits everything? I would probably look at it as you're going to have multiple models for specific tasks, and then some type of workflow or orchestration layer that helps the different models communicate with each other.
All right, very good. Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Emma, for your questions and comments today. And keep them coming, folks. We love it. Let's move on now, folks, to our next discussion topic, one that I'm particularly curious about, and that is how to scale Gen AI. And Eve, perhaps you can help us a little bit. I guess, what does scaling mean in this sense? What does scaling look like? And what are some of the challenges that I need to overcome when scaling Gen AI in a way that will build ROI?
Yeah, that's a big question actually, and I think kind of like, you know, the things to consider as you're going from a POC, from a pilot into a more kind of like enterprise, you know, ready kind of like, you know, deployment, is to make sure that the service can be managed, you know, can be accessed by you, by your teams. You can authorize users like any other cloud service. You want to make sure that these models, like, you know, there is some transparency around how these models are built and, you know, what type of work they do. Again, to make sure that you safeguard it for your user experience. You also want to make sure that, you know, back to Andrew's point, that, you know, the size is the right one that, you know, will help you to fine tune them, because in most cases you will need to customize them, right? You need to infuse your own data sets, whether it's your customer data, your HR information. So make sure that, you know, these models can be, you know, fine tuned by your teams. Also make sure, again, that they're built with responsible AI and you have the right tools to diagnose and mitigate any potential harmful use. And also, like, you know, the fundamental enterprise things like data privacy. I know a lot of customers are considering open source models. Whether it's a good or a bad idea, I would say make sure that you know how your data is being used, is being accessed, who sees it, what they do with it. And also the fundamental bits, like, you know, kind of like, you know, outside of whether it can be managed, like, you know, is it secure, and you know, can it scale and grow as your number of use cases grow as well.
Now, David, what areas should I consider when it comes to scaling Gen AI that will really make a difference, and provide more value? Can you give us some use case examples of where you suggest that we might look?
So right now, I think there are two clear areas in which generative AI is already providing, let me say, returns at scale. I would say that the first one is process efficiency. So there are lots of companies that are already successfully deploying generative AI to make their internal processes more efficient, not only by automating part of the process, also by using Gen AI to make a complete redesign of how processes are being used as part of the company daily work. So we have some examples for the pharmaceutical industry, in which we are applying, for example, generative AI to the research process. So the medical teams are using generative AI to process a lot of research papers that can be later used into the development of new treatments and new drugs. So they are being able to be a 40% more efficient in the use of this kind of technology. So that would be an example. And then I think the second area in which we are seeing very promising results is everything related to software development and software modernization. So we are able to deploy some tools. Actually, we are working a lot with Microsoft Toolset and other solutions that we have in-house for accelerating software modernization. And we are seeing up to 30% efficiency in the process of creating new software and software modernization with some of our financial services customers. So those are, I would say, two areas that apply to every single industry that are already becoming the ones that are providing very good results. As Andrew was mentioning, I think we are still seeing very little steps towards creating new products and services that are using generative AI for product creation. But I think those would be the next ones that are going to create a big disruption for our customers in terms of not only efficiency, but also new revenue streams.
Well, David, you pointed me right to the next question I was thinking of for Andrew. When I think about how to leverage Gen AI in ways that make a difference, David, you talked about efficiency, 30%, 40% efficiency gains. Those are great, and I love those. But on the other side of the coin, I also am very curious about how to use Gen AI to increase profit and revenue. Andrew, do you have any suggestions, or can you give us an example or a use case where you feel we can be successful in using Gen AI to drive profit and revenue?
Yeah. There's a couple of use cases I can think of. One is related to proposal development. So we're working with a client who gets a lot of proposals that they need to turn around very quickly. And there's a couple of steps to the proposal. There's, understanding the needs, there's the fit, there's the development of the response, and there's pricing. And you can use Gen AI now for the bulk of that process. And it's not 100% fit, but call it 60% of the proposals that come in, they will be able to automatically generate a first response. Now they'll need a human in the loop to be able to review the response, validate it, make sure it's correct, do tweaking before it goes back out. But they're able to save, hours and hours of time by leveraging Gen AI for the proposal development process to respond to people asking for quotes. So that's one example where you may let some opportunities go because you're flooded with too many requests for quotes that come in and you're not able to get enough back out, or you want to just drive more throughput in the process. Another example that I could share with you is with one of our clients. They're using Gen AI to do correlation analysis around performance to better understand different data sets and how it's driving performance in market, where they're doing really well and where the gaps are. And because they're a very large, organization that's sells products across the world, doing that level of correlation is very difficult. But Gen AI can do a lot of that for you and really help the human understand, here are the most impactful either opportunities or issues we need to solve, and really focus their effort on driving actionability versus them spending their time trying to diagnose the issue.
Well, David, you're or excuse me, Andrew, you're pointing us to a question coming again in from our audience today about tracking and evaluating the performance and impact of Gen AI models. What are some of the most effective methods used for tracking and evaluating Gen AI, and how can they be used to inform decision making? I'll put that out to the group. Any thoughts for, and thank you, Emma, for your question again. Any thoughts for Emma on this?
I can start, and then maybe David wants to jump in.
Sure.
You know, prompt engineering is one way to refine a model, but also understand where it may be hallucinating or where it may be drifting from a particular answer. I mean, there's a lot of work done up front that you need to do to a model to train it and leverage the right data sets to make sure that you're getting accuracy. But David, let me pass this one to you.
So basically, I see that there are two ways in which we can measure the contribution and performance of Gen AI models. Of course, we have the quantitative ones, and here we can talk about things such as perplexity or diversity. So there's there's a lot of I would say quantitative methods to measure if a model is behaving like we are expecting from a, let me say, technical point of view. But I think that the way to effectively measure the contribution should be how we can link the accuracy of the model to a more broad challenge that we have from a business perspective. So I think that the relevant thing here is how we can create metrics that are actually linked to the business challenge that we have. And that is, I think, that is what we are seeing that makes a huge difference. So when we are able to move from a very technical evaluation of the model to a more, let me say, user experience or qualitative metrics. So if we are able to create some KPI that is directly linked to the goals that a chief executive has in the organization, then I think we can better relate that technology to the return of investment and to the, I would say, overall satisfaction in terms of user experience. So I think it's very relevant that we combine both. And going back to Andrew's point, we can use things such as prompting to create specific validation tasks for the models in order to see if the model is able to comply with very specific assignments to fulfill the challenge that we have.
All right, we are here today. This is AI Talk. We are here today with David Perea, Chief Gen AI Officer at NTT Data, also Eve Salty, Senior Director of Artificial Intelligence for Microsoft, and Andrew Wells, Chief Data and AI Officer at NTT Data. Thank you so much for being with us today. If you have questions or comments for the group, please do pop them into the chat feature. That's where I'll be looking. We'll get them into the flow of the show, and we'll have a few minutes here also in a few minutes at the end for your questions. All right, everybody, I'd like to move us on to our third discussion point today, one that's super important, and that is ensuring retraining and upskilling are central to your plans for generative AI, not only in change management, but making the most out of generative AI. So my question to you, Eve, is what skills are most important that as a leader, maybe I should be looking at, and what training programs are available to me to provide to my staff so that I can bring them up to speed?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think kind of like retraining and upskilling are big components as we kind of like continue in that Gen AI era. The technology is evolving quite fast. So it's really important to stay on top of the different innovations that are coming. Like, you know, like 2 years ago, we were talking about large language models and how they can do kind of like multiple tasks at the same time. Now the pendulum is swinging towards kind of like smaller, more manageable, more easy to fine tune AI models. So definitely keeping up with what's coming from different hyperscalers, the different model providers is really key. But also not be overwhelmed. I think it's important for an organization to create a training program for their AI experts, but also for their non-technical teams too, so that you know, everybody has kind of like, you know, a baseline knowledge, and also the ability to transfer knowledge across departments, across groups. You know, obviously we highly recommend continuous learning with you know, workshops, with certifications, hands-on projects. I think, you know, the more you can get your hands dirty, going back to experimentation, the more successful you'll be in integrating this. And also, I think incentives play a key role. And that's what we do also on our end as well. We bake incentives like recognition, career development opportunities for employees who really engage in this retraining or upskilling initiatives. We, establish AI advocates across different teams so that they can help really drive the adoption. So yeah, creating kind of like the conditions for people to learn, to continue to learn from each other, and also get recognized, I think, are key.
Now, Andrew, when I talk with users and workers about this subject, they say, look, I'd love to be upskilled and trained. I'd be proactive in that approach, but I'm not sure exactly what skills I should be training in and where I can find those resources. So from your point of view, what skills are most important and what training programs are available that we should consider?
My 4-year-old just got back from school, so.
Hello, sunshine.
So I want to piggyback on something that Eve said, that when you think about change management and training a workforce, one thing that we found that's been very effective is gamifying it and having fun with it in your culture. So have a competition for who can create the best PowerPoint based off of a prompt, or who's got the tip of the week that gets an award for the best shortcut or the best innovation that they've had in Excel using Copilot. So I think if you gamify it and make it fun and put it in the atmosphere, and along with what Eve was saying, create some incentives around it, I think you can get a higher level of adoption. In terms of skills, I think was your question, Kevin.
Exactly. What skills are most important?
I think curiosity, believe it or not, I think curiosity is probably the most important item, is the willingness to play with the tools, to experiment, to understand how it could impact your job, is probably one of the most important skill sets. But then, I do think just training the 101 to understand the basics of it, to understand what's going on behind the scenes, to understand the terminology is really important as well.
Now, David, one of the things about upskilling and retraining is that, look, using generative AI or AI techniques in general often relieve workers of sort of repetitive and mundane, sort of low-level repetitive tasks. And the idea is then that organizations then are free to redeploy those employees into more value-added activities. Can you give us some examples of an organization that has done just that and been successful at upskilling and reskilling their employees? What did they do and what were the results?
Well, actually, we are a good example of that. Actually, we had a research group that was in charge of getting information from analysts, from external research, and kind of building our own internal conclusions of that to be shared with all of the company. And actually, what we found out when we started using generative AI as part of that group, our first expectation was we're going to create some efficiencies, right? So we can do the same work with maybe a smaller team. But the reality was pretty different. What we found out is that thanks to generative AI, we were providing more value to the company. And actually, what we saw is that we were getting more requests to the group. So actually, instead of decreasing the group, what we manage is now the group is even bigger because we are providing more value to the company. So I think that's the kind of a good example of how we can not only create efficiencies with technology, but also provide more value for the company. But going back to your point, I think there's a relevant thing to have in mind when it comes to upskilling, because a lot of companies are focusing a lot on this kind of let me say, non-value tasks and how we can use generative AI to automate those and free some time for our employees. But I think when we are talking about upskilling, we should be looking into a much broader space. I think, first of all, we should be thinking about how we should be evolving the roles we have in the organization, because a junior programmer 3 years from now will be very different to a junior programmer right now. And we should be thinking how these roles should be evolving together with our company in the next years. That would be the first thing to take a look at. And then the second one is how leadership itself should be evolving. So I think we need leaders that are questioning the way we are doing things for the last maybe 5 to 10 years, and think about how we can use this technology not only to make things more efficient, but to make things different. And I think it's a bold movement, but it's a movement that companies are going to require if they want to stay competitive. So that would be my recommendation, not to look only at non-value tasks, but also think about role evolution and leadership evolution.
All right, very good. I am here today with David Perea, Yves Salty, and Andrew Wells. We're here at AI Talk. We're talking about your generative AI journey. And folks, I don't know where our time went, but we are running so short of time. Before I go, I would like to ask each of you to provide us with one quick action item that our viewers and listeners can use to take advantage of your ideas and advice. David, I'd like to start with you. Do you have an action item for us?
Well, I have several, but let me try to summarize. I think the first one, you need to start experimenting. So I think the best time to start with your Gen AI journey is today. So we were talking before about being afraid. I think the worst thing that leaders can do right now is to not make decisions on how to embrace generative AI. So my recommendation is start now. Build a culture of experimentation like Yves and Andrew were sharing before, and then at the same time start thinking how you are going to scale this. And this means think about how you're going to create a scalable platform that can support your use cases. Think about how you are going to comply with the ongoing regulation, and think about how you can connect with the different stakeholders in the business to make sure that you are providing them with the right return of investment for these initial POCs. So that would be my recommendation. Start today, start small, but then prepare to change and to adapt.
That is David Perea. Dave, thank you so much. Dave is Chief General Gen AI Officer at NTT David. David, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
All right, Yves, do you have an action item for us today?
Yes, there is a lot of discussion around how to use the AI models and how to customize them for the use case and the scenario that you have. And I think there are a couple of misconceptions, and a lot of people are jumping into fine-tuning. I would recommend starting with prompt engineering fast, which is a great way to really personalize or customize the AI model that you're using to your use case. You can give the examples, you can give the model a few examples, and you can really improve the results of the outcome. Then if you need a little bit more, I would recommend retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, which is basically almost like a cheat sheet for your LLM. Only when these don't work and you need higher accuracy, or you need different types of results, then you go down into fine-tuning. And for fine-tuning, make sure that you define the use case, the baseline, you define the problem that you're trying to solve, and make sure you have a large, high-quality data set, because bad data equals bad model. And of course, this is an iterative process, so I would highly, highly recommend everyone to continue evaluating the results and the outcomes of the AI models that they're using to make sure that they're getting the most accurate outcomes.
That is Yves Salty, Senior Director of Artificial Intelligence at Microsoft. Yves, thank you so much for being with us today. Andrew, do you have an action item for us today?
I do. I want you to do something fun. I want you to go to your favorite LLM and put in, what for your favorite sport, top 10 players or teams for your sport, and see the response. And then I want you to cut and copy that and put it in PowerPoint and ask it to build a presentation for you and see what you get.
That is Andrew Wells, Chief Data and AI Officer at NTT Data. Andrew, Eve, David, thank you so much for being with us today. Your comments and perspectives were spot on. What a great panel. Thank you so much. I hope that we get a chance to talk again soon. And to everyone joining us today, thank you too. Thank you so much for being with us. Join us again November 5th with another great panel of guests where we'll be talking about the topic of data quality in the age of Gen AI. That should be another great discussion, so please join us then. And meantime, if you'd like to find me, you can do so on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect there. Check me out. I'm Kevin Crane. And you can also check out my weekly audio podcast, the Digital Transformation Podcast. But for now, that'll do it for this episode of Digital Transformation Talk. And until next week, I'm Kevin Crane. Thanks for watching.